This is Duke University.
All black, everything, everything black, culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back, black.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal, and we're joined today by Jasiri X, coming to us from the offices of Harry Belafonte in New York City. What's up, Jasiri? How you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day, and I'm honored, of course, to talk with you and be on your show.
Man, let's just start with the fact, you're sitting there at Harry Belafonte's offices. You can see the gold records in the background. You can see the photos of this legendary person. We know that, for a long time, he's been very committed to trying to bridge the gap generationally. He's been very active the last 6 months or so. So talk a little bit about what it's been like, to be in his presence, but also to hear him encourage folks like yourself or Ninth Wonder, Talib Kweli, to kind of push forward in the kind of work that you're doing.
Well, I mean, for me, it's like, he's the pinnacle of artist activists. And so for somebody like myself that's, trying to be an artist activist of today, it's really like, it's like, being in the presence of a Jedi master, in terms of, his legacy and what he's done. And so it's always, awe-inspiring. I mean, every time, we send talks to him, he says, something that resonates with us to push forward. And it's a blessing to just all the information that he has, all of the everything that he's done to pass those stories on to us, but also the strategy that's is necessary today, as needed today more than ever. I mean, we need, Harry Belafonte's vision and his voice today probably more than in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so it's an honor and a blessing to learn from him and really put it in a hip hop language and take it a little step further,
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We're joined by activist and artist Jasiri X, coming to us from New York City in the offices of Harry Belafonte. Jasiri, this has been an incredible year on so many different levels, whether it's the Zimmerman trial, the 50th anniversary of the bombing of the 16th Street Church, plus the March on Washington. And what's been amazing about your work and your output is that your voice has been a consistent aspect of all of these dynamics, right? Providing on the one level some clarity, some encouragement, some real fire. I think about the song where you kind of flipped the Kanye piece about the new black slaves. I mean, for me, that's some of the hardest shit I had ever heard you do.
Appreciate it.
So talk a little bit about what your process has been this last year. Trying to find inspiration. And how important it is for you to be able to make these kind of critical interventions.
Man, I mean, it's been, for me, it's really like I'm moved from the heart, and the spirit. And so when an incident touches me, I mean, something like the Zimmerman verdict, which, of course, not only I felt, but, people all over the country and the world felt. I mean, it's definitely something that as an artist, I feel like it's, if I have a platform or voice, I have to speak on an incident like that. And what's cool about today is, I have the internet, even though I'm signed to a record company, I don't have to go through an A&R or an executive to say you can't put out this or don't do this. I have the ability to, get my camera out, shoot a video, head to the studio, put a verse out, and speak to the myriad of issues that affect our community. So whenever I'm affected, when I heard Kanye's New Slaves, I felt like it was good. But, my question was, once you recognize that you're a slave, then what's the next step? You either accept slavery or you got to get free. So I wanted to make the Get Free song, in terms of that. And so, so sometimes, man, it's other artists inspire me, incidents that happen in our community inspire me, and I just get to writing. And then, like I said, I have the ability to put it out anytime I want, whatever manner that I want. And that's the beauty of technologies today, especially in terms of artist activists.
I mean, talk about this internet piece. I get into conversations, for lack of a better way to describe them, with old heads all the time. Folks who aren't on Twitter, who aren't on Facebook, don't do social media, don't spend a whole lot of time using YouTube. And when I tell them about your story, the fact that you have emerged as this critical voice without getting radio play, without having the mainstream record contract, that you've literally just did it yourself. Create songs, you and Paradise Grade, get them up on the web, you publish your lyrics. Talk about the sustainability of this model. I mean, because you've been doing this now for almost a decade. I mean, this isn't brand new. I mean, it's brand new for some folks. When I saw Philip Agnew, after he was blocked from speaking at the March in Washington celebration, and then he just takes his camera and does his little 4-minute piece, repping Dream Defenders and a range of other stuff. I'm wondering, could that have even been done without this example that Jasiri X and other folks have set, over the last 5 or 6 years?
Man, I think, like I said, I think that for people that aren't, I've made so many just friends on, Twitter, social networking, Facebook from all over the country, and connections. And so for me, it started with MySpace. I don't know if any of you people remember MySpace, but it started with me putting a song on MySpace called Free the Gina 6. Somebody sending that song to Michael Bazin, him playing it being played all over the country. And then, I started to put a video on YouTube every week. Next thing I know, people are bringing me to their universities. People are bringing me to their cities, and then people are asking me, how am I doing it? I'm doing workshops on how I'm doing it. Next thing you know, we find out in Pittsburgh that young black men are represented in the media 86% of the time, crime, 96% of the time, crime and sports. So we're like, well, hey, we can teach them to do what we did, which is tell our own stories, create our own media. Now we have a media academy. And so, what started out as just, me seeing a situation, an injustice, and wanting to speak to it. And because I had no other outlet, putting it online, it has actually become almost like a movement in terms of, not just making music or raps, but also, we'll put a video out just talking, telling our own stories, speaking to the moment, speaking for our generation. And, to me, the Dream Defenders is a wonderful example of that, as well as others. And I feel like this is what it's like established rappers do.
Yeah.
Established, rappers are now putting their stuff online. They're getting millions of views, and record labels are coming and signing them. So this is really the model now in terms of how you get your music out to the masses.
You mentioned the group the organization that you work with young black men in Pittsburgh, One Hood Media. Talk a little bit about that, because in my mind, that's actually some of the most important work that you're doing. Taking this kind of skill set that you have and being able to translate it to young black men. I mean, you mentioned, some of the stuff that came out in the Opportunity Agenda report, a few years ago, talking about the images of black men and boys in society. And if the culture isn't going to present us in the images that reflect who we are, what better strategy is there to actually equip young black men to be able to create their own images?
Absolutely. And then also, too, I think, like, we looked at it and said, well, where's the class on social media?
Right.
And, one of the things we found, young people are accessing social media, and in some instances, fights break out on social media, beef start on social media. Pictures and things are uploaded that they don't maybe realize might be there forever. And so we said, man, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could teach them how to use social media in a way where they can begin to tell their own story, and then media in a way. So it really started with us, wanting to kind of break down some of these images, because when those dominant narratives, young people are seeing if the dominant narratives of black men is crime, then it begins to influence the way we act in our own communities. And so once we began to, one of the things we saw, though, was they were so much more aware than I, coming in, really gave them credit for. I thought I was going to come in and drop all this science on them, and I'm this dope media creator, and they were so farther along. So we saw that we just got to empower them and move out the way. And so all of our students get an iPad mini, because we felt like, how can we teach them media creation and not give them something in which they can create media with, they can access the internet with. But that's just a small step. We've had some of our students transition to student teachers, and we really want to create employ this model of One Hood Media as also a for-profit organization. So now when these campaigns and different things want a video for us, we can employ this group of young black men. We want to show them that this is a viable option other than some of the other things that we might do to get money. You know, Pittsburgh right now, youth unemployment among young black men specifically is 80 to 90%.
Wow.
And so how do we create avenues for our young people to even just get some money in their pocket in the short term?
You know, it's funny, it's like the very stuff that you just laid out. I had the opportunity to listen to a lecture from William Julius Wilson, you know, who of course is, you know, the great black sociologist up at Harvard. And he was talking about the unemployment rates around black men and how there's a disconnect between where the jobs are and where black men are. But yet now we have access to technology that allows us to close this gap. And you know, one of the things I threw out to him is that, you know, when we think about, because, you know, on some level, I love the title of the organization, One Hood Media, but you have all these folks around the country, for instance, in housing projects that don't have broadband access. You know, so they're trying to apply to their jobs, you know, on a cell phone. They're trying to fill out job applications. You know, they're trying to get their little half-an-hour time at the library, you know, to get online for a half hour. So, you know, yeah, they can check their Twitter and their Facebook, but also respond to email or something like that. I mean, talk about the ways that One Hood Media is hoping to address some of those disconnects.
I mean, and it's interesting that you say that, because that's something that we are looking at right now in terms of, because we, you know, we have students that, you know, are, you know, they don't have Wi-Fi at their house. And so the only time they can really get online and connect is through programs like this. And so we're looking and saying, like, well, how can we solve this? Is there a way that we can get funding to supplement, you know, to get Wi-Fi in our community? I mean, Wi-Fi is vital now. Just like you said, it's vital to accessing the world in the 21st century.
It's like water and electricity, right? It's a utility, right? It should be accessed just like a utility, right?
So if you're, you know, if you get a laptop, but you don't have the way to access that, and then just like I said, the power, understanding that the power of the computer, like you can just go on Twitter and Facebook and you can do these things and just be funny or be clever, or you can actually do it in a way where you can actually generate income for yourself. You can generate influence for yourself. You can generate power for yourself and your communities. These are the type of things we're really looking at. And also you can change the story. This is the one powerful thing, you know, and when people are critical of social networking, you know, to me, I mean, the story of Trayvon, if it wasn't for social networking, we probably would never have heard it. You know what I'm saying? The movement around Troy Davis, it probably wouldn't have been what it was if it wasn't for our ability to organize online, Occupy, and so on and so forth. And so, to me, it's really about how do we harness that power in a way that we can really make it work for us in a stronger way and in a more unified way. And then also how to encourage young black men who to not just feel like they have to be represented by mainstream media, but they can tell their own story and make some of those positive things go viral, like we make some of this foolish stuff go viral, you know?
You're watching Left of Black. We are joined today by Jasiri X, who of course is a well-known activist and artist coming to us from New York City. The offices of Harry Belafonte. Jasiri, of course, is Pittsburgh-based. I know, Jasiri, that when the Zimmerman trial, when the verdict came down, you were in Chicago with the 100 BYP, you know, this group of young activists that Kathy Cohen and others have brought together. Talk about what the experience has been working within 100 BYP, but also the significance, BYP 100, but also the significance of being in that space at that time when the Zimmerman trial, you know, when the verdict comes down.
You know, it was, you know, and I've thankfully, you know, I've been blogging for Black Youth Project for probably about 3 years. You know, I met Kathy Cohen at a conference. She saw one of my videos and was like, you know, let's, you know, I need you for the website, and that's been something that I've been blessed to do. To be in Chicago, you know, I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember hearing that they had I assumed that it would be like, once it hit the weekend, it would be Monday, and I remember.
I think everybody thought that, yeah.
Right. They said we had a verdict, and I remember saying to myself, I felt like I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
But to be in a place where we had 100 young Black activists from all over the country, and everybody in a room holding hands together, and then hearing it be not guilty, and to see the effect that it had on, you know, men and women shedding tears, you know what I'm saying, holding one another, comforting one another, but then to then get resolve and resilience and say like, okay, now what are we going to do? We're here.
Right.
It's not a coincidence. And let's get busy. And so, you know, you had a portion of BYP activists worked into the night, that night, putting that statement together that we read, putting plans together. And so it's been incredible because, I mean, I've been able to meet, you know, people that I didn't know that are really experts in their field from all over the country, and to do it in a unified way, in a unified effort, then connect with groups like the Dream Defenders and other groups that are organizing as well. To me, this is how we win. You know, we win not trying to, you know, say, well, this is my organization, this is my thing, and you got to come be a part of my thing. No, we win when we put all of our talents, skills, and gifts together, and we begin to move in a unified front, an organized front. That's how we win. And so I feel blessed to be a part of it and honored to be a part of it. And, you know, at the end of the day, man, I'm a frontline soldier. So BYP 100 want me to go and, you know, pick up the trash, man. That's how I'm willing to do what we got. Whatever leads to liberation, let's get it. That's my spirit.
What's next for you, Jasiri?
I have I'm working on a project now. It's called Power. People Oppressed Will Eventually Rise. With an amazing producer out of London, England, named Agent of Change, as well as Religion and an MC named Kadir Latif. And I've just been, you know, traveling around the country performing. I was just blessed to do something with Sway and Tech and a Wake Up Show in LA. And of course, you know, I'm here, you know, Mr. Belafonte has a vision for using hip hop and using our influence to talk about child incarceration, to talk about the violence in our community, to raise our voices in a unified manner, to speak to issues that truly affect our community. And I'm here to do whatever I can to help him as well.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Jasiri. You actually have the title of being the first three-time guest on Left to Black.
Oh, wow. I'm honored.
So thanks for making some time, particularly we know how busy your schedule is, and all the best to you, man, and peace for everything that you're doing.
Hey, man, I'm telling you, I love what you do. You got a model too. And it's like we don't have to wait for some other show to come and grab us up. No, we can put our own show together, and I watch it. It's incredible, and you do a great job. So, man, whatever you do for me,
I appreciate it. And you know, please give Mr. Belafonte a hug for us.
I definitely will.
Take care.
Peace.
Can claim God but never read scripture, so we worship fame because of celebrities richer. So Jesus becomes Jesus, then I guess Kim Kardashian is Mary Magdalene. And all her sins are cleansed through the camera lens. But then again, maybe I'm just rambling. Line up these industry CEOs and let me battle them. Show Jimmy Iovine the crime scene with his headless brethren and tell him sign these. And when I hear sirens, disconnect his neck from his spine clean. The difference my spitting is the equivalent of using your high beams. All I want is you and your mind free. The time needs way more than a nice beat and a rhyme scheme, cause all that bullshit y'all talking don't fertilize seeds.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, and we're here with C. Riley Snorton, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University, or what we'd like to call Penn North. We're also joined by Professor Mecca Sullivan, Assistant Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at UMass Amherst, and we're here to talk about a new special issue of the journal Palimpsest, The Queerness of Hip Hop and the Hip Hop of Queerness, which was co-edited by C. Riley Snorton and Scott Polson Bryan, and of course Professor Sullivan is a contributor. How are you two both doing today?
Great, thanks so much.
Very well, yeah, very well, thanks.
So Riley, let me just throw out for you, what was the inspiration for this journal, special issue that you co-edited with Scott?
Yeah, so this actually began, I would say, as early as 2009 when I was on fellowship at the Du Bois Institute at Harvard. I met Scott there, and we both would have this, dream. What would it be like to bring together some of the most interesting minds to think about the relationships between LGBT studies, queer theory, hip-hop studies, Black cultural production, and Black culture. And so that dream turned into a plan to have a symposium, which happened last fall at Harvard. It was a one-day symposium, and it had we were blessed with just a tremendous amount of wealth and resources in the way of scholarly interests, and people came and really, you know, in the colloquial sense, right, they just showed out. So it was an amazing day of papers that were given from both established and emerging scholars. And so the special issue represents just a slice of what happened that day. And it is really gratifying to see it now in this written form. And Scott and I are also talking about moving toward an edited collection, because there's just so much interesting work happening at this intersection. And we know that folks are hungry to teach this in class. People are just generally interested in reading about this, these connections. And it's just been really humbling to see the project unfurl in these ways.
Mecca, you of course contributed a piece at the conference and also, you know, in the new volume. You know, when someone says to you this idea of the hip hop of queerness or the queerness of hip hop, I mean, what were you thinking as you were kind of pulling together your own work to contribute to this project?
Sure. Well, you know, I really, you know, I had talked with Riley a little bit during the sort of conception of that dream and was just as excited about it, I think, as, you know, as he suggested he and Scott were. For me, I think the idea, that sort of palindromic frame that they're establishing, right, the queerness of hip hop / the hip hop of queerness, really gets at what's exciting about a project like this. It's not only about, you know, sort of articulating the prominence and the important place that queer studies takes within Black studies, but also thinking about Black studies and queer studies, and of course how culture sort of, you know, helps facilitate some of those intersections. So for me, you know, as a lit person and someone who's interested in poetics, my first thought was, so what are the formal implications of this sort of back and forth that we're talking about? And, you know, the poetics of hip hop, I think, is a really sort of rich terrain for thinking about what queerness can mean, right? What difference can mean, you know, how the kind of sort of countercultural, subcultural, anti-hegemonic properties of hip hop can work on a formal level. And so that was, you know, I was just ready to sort of dive in, and as most of the contributors and the presenters were that day.
You know, I was fortunate enough to be at the conference last year, and also fortunate to have a piece that's in the new volume. And it struck me as one of the most amazing conversations that I had ever seen in terms of talking about hip hop, regardless of the space, regardless of who the contributors were. And so let me follow up with you, Mecca. You know, Harvard has just announced, there was a press conference, the Nasir Jones Fellowship, and you know, Nas, you know, very famously 5 or 6 years ago said hip hop is dead. You know, and he's even been retreating on some of that himself, you know, in recent years. But you know, what does it say about hip hop, you know, that hip hop can sustain this kind of conversation at this moment?
Right. You know, I think it says something that those of us who identify as hip hop heads, something that we've known for quite a while, right? Which is that hip hop, you know, is very rich. You know, it's a sort of very fertile, rich ground for cultural and critical inquiry. And I think that, you know, many of us have been doing that kind of work formally and or informally, even conversationally, right? Sort of figuring out what are some of the historical, political, and again, for me, even, you know, formal or poetic implications of what hip hop culture does. And, you know, it's wonderful to see increasing institutional support for that kind of inquiry. You know, I mean, you know, teaching hip hop, I mean, a lot of us, I think, bring pop culture into the classroom, even if that's not our training, right? Because it's a great way to get students to think about the relevance of, you know, a number of our disciplines in their lives. And it's great to see, again, increasing resources for making that happen in the classroom. And with an issue like this, you know, seeing it happen, you know, as scholarship, sort of circulating as scholarship more formally.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Professor C. Riley Snorton, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University, and also Professor Mecca Sullivan, who's Assistant Professor of Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies at UMass Amherst. We're talking about the just published special issue of the journal Palimpsest, the Queerness of Hip Hop and the Hip Hop of Queerness. Riley, talk a little bit about some of the people who contributed to the journal issue.
Great. So the special issue is organized like a mixtape. which means that we've got some short tracks and we've got some longer tracks. The way that the conference was organized, we had 2 plenary roundtables, and 90% of the people who were on the plenary roundtables actually also were generous enough to offer up shorter form essays for the special issue. So we've got folks like Lamonda Horton-Stalling, Sharon Holland, of course, you, Mark, Tavia Nyong'o, Ricky Rodriguez, or Richard Rodriguez is what he publishes under. There's also Jana Brown, and Ronaldo Walcott and Imani Perry. That's just the short form riffs, if you will, on the question, Queerness of Hip Hop, Hip Hop of Queerness.
I mean, for a second, Riley, talk about that generational piece, because, I mean, one of the things that was really striking about the conference is that you really had these new emergent voices with these, you know, for lack of a better way to describe it, OGs. And it became really this great space in terms of the kind of conversation that got produced in this context.
Absolutely. I think one of the things to also mark about hip hop and hip hop communities is that for as much as we talk about hip hop as being a voice piece for youth, it's also due to the kind of longevity of the cultural form become an intergenerational space. And yet hip hop communities also have given us certain forms of protocols, procedures to have those kinds of intergenerational conversations. So I think in a lot of ways, what people described as the kind of openness of the conference is really given to us vis-a-vis our participation in this pop cultural form.
Yeah, I mean, say what you want about how folks might individually feel about, say, a Nas or a Jay-Z, but I think anybody would dispute of thinking about them as two of the top 10 voices that are present now. Right. And Nas is 40 and Jay-Z's 43, and exactly. In some ways, this is not simply about youth culture. I think we actually do damage to thinking about hip hop when we infantilize it. I think so much of what this issue shows is not only has hip hop grown up, but so many of us have grown up with hip hop in a way that is, is just simply part of our worldview.
Right. And it shapes and inflects the scholarship regardless of whether or not you're talking about hip hop as a particular cultural form. Absolutely.
And Mecca, your work, and I remember your presentation from the conference as something that, if I had pearls, I would have clutched them because of the way that it really was pushing the conversation. But you really are dealing with this idea of fatness, really, and body image and how that plays into how we think about hip hop. I mean, we're hard pressed to think about, at least in terms of the kind of critical language that's been brought to bear, to think about what a Notorious B.I.G.'s body looks like in hip hop, what a Heavy D's bodies look like in hip hop, and the ways that women's bodies are policed, right? And when you think about what Missy Elliott looked like, say, 15 years ago, and what she looks like now, is this very different kind of dynamic. So talk a little bit specifically about what you were trying to do with your essay.
Sure. Well, yeah, that's exactly sort of where I was going. I mean, on one hand, we've got a whole, I think of it maybe even as a sort of pantheon, right, of sort of corpulent rappers. You mentioned several of them. I might add to the list Heather B, Queen Latifah, Big Pun, Fat Joe, right, and many, many others. I mean, the list is long. And of course, we've thought, a number of scholars have sort of thought about how the body works in hip hop, how sexuality and sexualization and various forms of objectification work in hip hop. And I think that, there's a sort of fissure there that queer studies and queer theory really allow us to kind of get into. We think, as Kathy Cohen does, right, of queerness as sort of signaling difference a bit more broadly than just sexuality, sort of sexual object choice, right, absolutely. Then that brings us into this conversation. Well, what does it mean when these bodies are different? How are they styled? How are they presented? And what are some of the discrepancies between the lyrics, right? How, the rappers' personae imagine their own sexual bodies versus how they might be packaged and how they might be interpreted. So for me, Biggie, again, as a hip hop head and a huge Biggie fan, no pun intended, Biggie is a fantastic example there, right? I mean, he's a figure whose corpulence is, part of his name, right? Several of his names, in fact, very much a part of his image. And, he is a kind of self-styled sex symbol in a way. Often, that, that connection is sort of misinterpreted as a relationship of sort of, sexuality or sexual attractiveness in spite of, a sort of fat body.
Right.
And, kind of a closer inquiry really sort of leads us to, has led me at least to see that that's not the case with him at all. In fact, that his lyrics are really about sort of a sexual attractiveness that's accessed through fatness.
Right.
And, how queer is that, right? And I think that's what hip hop allows us to think about.
And, it's interesting because, when you think about Big Pun, who I actually would argue takes it even further in terms of that sexuality piece, I mean, there's a way in which, his fatness literally kills him.
Sure.
And then you look at someone like Fat Joe, who you'd be apt just to call Joe these days, right?
Right.
Because he...
Right.
And it's really interesting that it's this male rapper, right, who has to also go through this process because of the way we think about fatness within the context of hip hop and what it means now to have a brand, and have to deal with what your body looks like in that way.
Sure, absolutely.
And there's a way that we would have never thought that this was the conversation that hip hop would take us to.
Right. And I think many folks in hip hop might not have thought this is a conversation that queer theory would take us to either, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of what's really important about the way that the question of this conference and this issue of Palimpsest have been sort of posed. But I would just add too, I mean, I love the way that you sort of articulate that connection between fatness and death, because for me that's sort of that's the next step of this paper for me. Right. Of course, these are also really important conversations that are happening in queer theory, right? Sort of the death drive, how death can be written on bodies, and sort of where certain bodies are sort of marked as already dead.
Right.
And I think we can see those connections. I mean, looking at, as doing the work for this paper, really looking into the ways in which Biggie's death has been framed. Really, there are all kinds of puns about his weight in the kind of media reporting on his death. Even though, unlike Big Pun, right, he didn't die of a cause that we can sort of directly link to his weight and to obesity. So I think, to me, it's super exciting as well to think about all of the other ways in which the discourse, the conversations we're having about queerness and sexuality really are closely related to the conversations we're having about Blackness, Black culture, and Black bodies.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined today by Professor Mecca Sullivan, who's Assistant Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at UMass Amherst. We're also joined by Professor C. Riley Snorton, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies, Northwestern University, who was the co-editor, along with Scott Paulson Bryant, a friend of Left of Black, of a special issue of Palimpsest, The Queerness of Hip Hop and the Hip Hop of Queerness. Mecca, what's next for you on the agenda?
Oh, well, there's quite a lot going on. I'm really fortunate. Right now, I'm a postdoctoral fellow. Before I begin at UMass Amherst, right now I'm doing a year fellowship at Rutgers University and working on my critical project, which will become, hopefully, knocking on wood, a first book. The project is called The Poetics of Difference in Afro-Diasporic Women's Literature. And so I look at Black women's literature of the African diaspora and think about the relationships between poetic form and gender, sexual, class, and several other sort of aspects of identity. So this project was a wonderful way of sort of thinking about my larger project and figuring out how that might articulate in a totally different context. I don't deal very much with hip hop in the book, right. And yet it's really exciting to see sort of where that same line of thinking might lead us.
Riley, tell the audience about Nobody is Supposed to Know, Black Sexuality on the Down Low, your forthcoming book from the University of Minnesota Press.
Yes, so it will be out and available for people to purchase in February. And the book takes up the emergence and circulation of the concept down low in news and popular culture. By down low, I am specifically talking about the kind of crystallization of meaning where down low came to refer to Black men who have sex with men and women and do not identify as gay, bisexual, or queer. Now, that's a starting point. But what the project is really interested in is thinking about how narratives like the down low are just one instance of a kind of more general framing of Black sexual representations. And so in the project, I look at figures like R. Kelly or Bishop Eddie Long, but I'm also looking at Oprah Winfrey, Will Smith, Queen Latifah, and thinking about the way that rumor and speculation figure Black sexual representations.
We've been joined today by Professor Mecca Sullivan, University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Also joined by Professor C. Riley Snorton, Assistant Professor, Communication Studies, Northwestern. Thank you both for joining us today on Left of Black.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black everything, everything black, culture over everything, y'all, we taking it back.